Good to see you. Since part 5, it's been a busy, stressful, almost overwhelming week. But fortunately, I didn't use that as an excuse to murder people, so now we can continue on to part 6 of our review of the Chris Watts interrogation. So I'm really excited about this one. Graham is about to string Chris up and watch him twist in the wind. And so we get to watch too. He's been so confident and just oozing confidence in himself and his ability to lie and get away with things. Where we left off, how he was implying that nobody in his life could have been capable of making them going missing, so thereby putting himself above everybody. And we covered how that actually makes him beneath everybody to lower himself to resorting to that kind of an action. So he's feeling good. He's really confident in his abilities. And now he's about to be challenged, directly challenged. And the first thing that we get into where Graham really tests him is Chris was saying how I'm not worried about them, talking about the people. No one else could be capable of that. So-and-so, I'm not worried about them. And Graham has picked up that Chris doesn't really seem to be worried about anybody except himself. So he says, "Who are you worried about?" And Chris rambles through things we've already covered, and then Graham says, "So who are you worried about?" Chris is kind of confused, but then does more rambling through more things that we've already covered. Graham says, "So who are you worried about?" Number one, it goes right over Chris's head that he should be worried about his family. Number two, it follows the Chris Watts rule in that he's lying. He really is worried about one person, and that's himself. But he's lying about it and following his own rule, because if he says he's worried about himself, then that will point the suspicion towards himself. And most important of all, number three, the way Chris finally caps off the question that Graham keeps repeating. Everybody is showing their deep concern, and that deep concern can't be faked. And Chris, you just may be the greatest example of that being true. You might be the poster boy of that for our generation. In fact, that should be a meme. Someone needs to make a meme about that. Just Chris Watts' mugshot with the line, "Deep concern can't be faked." Chris Watts, 2018. So he failed that challenge by Graham. And next we go into one of the most covered sections. Everybody who has covered this crime in the interrogation has done the next sort of 10, 15 minutes of the interrogation, where Graham starts it off by saying, "Can we talk about something that's kind of hard to talk about?" And it really is a great part, but there's no reason for me to go into it for the purposes of this series, because Chris doesn't reveal anything new. Graham implies suspicion in his way, where he's really smooth and kind of on the fence. And Chris, in his attempts to act innocent, actually makes himself look more guilty. So we don't need to really cover all of the things that we've already covered again, because they're just repeated in that next section. For the record, though, here's some of the quotes from that section. "This is something I would never do. There's no way I'd harm anybody in my family. I had nothing to do with any of that at all. We have no idea where she is. I'm not an argumentative person. I'm never going to be abusive in any kind of relationship. I'm not about confrontation. I am not that person. I have never been that person. I do not know where my wife is." So if you've been playing the Chris Watts rule drinking game, you've probably gone into a coma by now. But Chris has now shown his own ass, and he knows it, because Graham leaves him with that. He leaves him with the suspicion. Graham is still on the fence, but he's leaving with you know how this looks, right, Chris? And he leaves the room for about 20 minutes, and Chris is in there alone. So he's thinking about this right now, and his defenses are about to go way up. And when Graham comes back into the room with the picture of Chris's daughters, Bella and Celeste, Chris is about to go for an Oscar in his depiction of the loving family man, and will actually earn a Razzie Award for the absolute worst performance of a loving family man that we've ever seen. Because he grabs the picture of the girls and proceeds to give what could only be considered a eulogy to his dead daughters, who are still just missing at this point. I remember when they wore that dress. She loved that dress. She loved those shoes. She always had good times in those shoes. I put her in a Supergirl outfit and she loved it. This would be Chris's victim impact statement at the sentencing hearing. If somebody else really had been responsible for the crime and Chris was innocent, this whole speech he gives while looking at the picture of his girls in front of Graham would be his victim impact statement, word for word. It fits right in with all the rest of the victim impact statements. So I know there's been a lot of analysis about how this is like him giving away that he knows they're already dead, and that might be part of it. I lean more towards he has run out of his prepared excuses and his prepared lines to cover up why he's innocent and that he had nothing to do with it. And now I think since he's run out of those and he's being challenged more than ever, I think he's scraping the bottom of the barrel and he's actually digging into his future lines that he came up with before he actually committed the crime, maybe before he even planned it in that summer. I think he was fantasizing about, after they would be gone, getting sympathy from people like, oh, how's it been going since your family's been gone? It's too bad. And maybe he started fantasizing about answers he would give to increase people's sympathy of him. And he would be fantasizing about being at the candlelight vigil they might have and saying things like this. Or maybe at, like I said, the eulogy at their ceremonial funeral for them, when it turns out that everyone accepts that they're finally gone and they're not coming back. These are the things he fantasized about saying. But since he's out of lines and all he can do at this point is repeat himself, as you've just seen, he's now scraping the bottom of the barrel into the future lines that he had prepared for after it's already accepted that they're gone. So that's why it sounds awkward to me. And so the next thing of note is when Graham asks about infidelity. And this has been covered heavily too already, but I wanted to point out some things about it that I noticed, because I think it's a sneak peek. Even though his defenses have just come way up, Graham can read him so well that maybe this was unintentional too. Maybe I'm giving Graham too much credit. I mean, he is a great investigator, and I love this interrogation and the job he does here. But this does give a sneak peek behind Chris's defenses when he asks about infidelity. And the reason this is so revealing to me is Chris says, I have never cheated on my wife. And just the way he overstates that, you can tell that he enjoys the flavor of that lie. He is just savoring every syllable. I have never cheated on my wife. You can even detect a little gleam in his eye just by listening to his voice. And Graham starts picking him apart about you've lost weight. That sometimes leads people to be unfaithful, Chris. And while Chris is going back into defending why he never cheated on his wife, but it's just because he fell out of love with his wife, His voice undergoes a transformation here. And it's, to me, another psychosomatic response, much like when he was rubbing his neck, talking about the emotional conversation, because it was a tell, like the FBI agent said in an interview, that they suspected he strangled her, and they turned out to be right. This is another tell to me that while he's defending himself and saying he's never cheated on his wife and talking about how he fell out of love with Shanann and that's the only reason, his voice starts to imitate the mistress a lot more. As he's talking about falling out of love with her, his voice is getting more crackly. It's like I've seen comments refer to it as a vocal fry, and that's a perfect description of it, the way it just goes. There's nothing you can do to like cope with that. I can't even do it. My voice is too raspy, but I don't think they'd be capable of that. Just the way it like crackles out to a flat finish. He's saying like way more often, and he's enthusiastic about it too when he's describing it. He gets a little pep in his verbal step. He's enjoying painting himself as superior to Shanann by saying all these things, by verbally rejecting her. And just imitating the way the mistress talks is another psychosomatic response to talking. What he's really talking about is the affair. And the thing of note that I detected here is the part where he gets to where he says, you know, you can just like look at someone or put their forehead to their forehead and you know what each other's thinking. That's a connection. I didn't have that connection anymore. I can't do the vocal fry. But I didn't have that connection anymore. He didn't have it with Shanann, but he thinks he had it with the mistress. And from what I can tell, it seems like they did get along and have a lot in common. But at this point, she hasn't dumped his sorry ass yet, so he still thinks he has a great connection where they can read each other's minds, because I go back to, they did kind of share this double speak that rotten people do to justify their rotten actions. Like from the prison interview, Chris would say how one of the reasons the mistress came to his house was because it was to check his macros. Yeah, she just came over to check my macros, downplaying his mistress coming to his wife's house. And I couldn't help but wonder why she didn't check his macros any other place. You have your entire daily routine memorized by rote. I think you could have just told her your macros in the car and she could have made an assessment. She didn't have to come to your house for macros. She was there for another reason. So I think that's the kind of connection that he thinks he has with her. And I think that when he committed the crime, he was thinking that she was just going to be in that same subversive way, accepting of it. And instead, he was surprised to find either that day or later that night, maybe in the morning, that it was the reason she was finally waiting for to dump him, just to throw him out like a used tissue, because she was getting ready. Maybe we'll talk about this later on when he finally reveals that he had an affair, is finally somewhat honest about that. But I think she was getting ready to dump him anyway, and this was just her reason to finally do it. The thing about it's as close to guaranteed as you can be that she knew Shanann was pregnant, and then she credits hearing about it on the news as being the reason she dumped Chris and deleted everything. I think she knew. She just didn't care. Or she got a kick out of it. But we'll probably get into that later. So at this point, he still thinks he has that really good connection with the mistress. So when he says, I didn't have that connection anymore, he means with Shanann, but he thinks he still has it with the mistress, when in reality, he doesn't, and she's getting ready to dump him after she sees the news report. So Graham lets Chris finish. He's questioning him more about how he's basically just testing his love for his family. Like, it doesn't seem like he loved them very much, more or less, is what he's implying. And Chris keeps defending himself and going overboard in his attempts. He just keeps repeating it with stronger language. And Graham kind of lets him finish this long, over-the-top speech about, I love them. I had nothing to do with this disappearance. I want them back as much as anybody. I'm a loving guy. I love them. Graham kind of just lets him finish. Doesn't believe him, but lets him get away with it. And then he just changes topics to, tell me about a typical day. And Chris suddenly just springs to happy attention and recites every detail of his day. Okay, so you mean one where I'm typically home all day? Or one on the weekend? 7 months ago, Saturday? How about that? No? Okay, a regular day. Well, it starts off at 4 o'clock when I get up. I go downstairs and I work out. Okay, so then at 4:30, everyone's still asleep. I go upstairs, I make my breakfast, a protein shake, I get my chicken ready for dinner. And it's just like, dude, you were just talking about how your missing family who could be dead, how much you love them and want them back, and now you're so happy to be reciting everything you do in a day. Thing that's significant about that is he remembers this stuff because he wants credit for every single thing he does. And the reason he fell out of love, what he perceives as love, is because he just wasn't, in his mind, getting enough back for everything that he was doing, which everybody does and is just fine with it. So, more twisting in the wind is to come, but for now we're getting long, so we'll have to get to the rest of his Razzie-worthy performance in the next video. See you next time.